What have you overheard that made you laugh, or what have you said that made a stranger laugh? San Francisco, and its surrounding area, is serviced by a railcar subway known as the BART, or Bay Area Rapid Transit System. While a nominally useful fixture, this mode of transportation suffers from the fact that it evidently intersects several different parallel dimensions, becoming a kind of attraction point of all the strangeness and insanity that the multiverse can offer. Someone riding the BART may encounter a homeless fellow who claims to have invented Bill Gates. Yes, Bill Gates the person. Or they could find themselves watching three teenagers breakdance their way across the ceiling. Both of those have happened to me, incidentally, but the funniest moment that I had with a BART-riding stranger occurred when I found myself trying to interact with an elderly Chinese woman. The individual in question had come hobbling into the car with a large backpack held in front of her. It was clear that she was trying to find a seat for herself, and the vacant spot next to me was the only easily accessible one. After shuffling over and sitting down, the woman went through a semi-comical series of pantomimes with me as we tried to figure out where she could put her belongings. And although neither of us spoke the other's language, the process helped us develop an odd sort of in-the-moment camaraderie. That warmth remained as the train started moving, which is when an impromptu lesson began. My new friend nudged my arm and pointed to a seemingly random person. "Chicken," she said. "Chicken?" I repeated. "Chicken," the woman repeated. "Guh, guh, guh." I have since learned that "guh" is what chickens say in China. I squinted at the person who was allegedly the embodiment of a fowl. She was a young woman with her hair in a tight ponytail, wearing a pantsuit that suggested a career in some variety of cubicle-based environment. Nothing about her screamed chicken, but I suppose that she might have been hiding feathers beneath her clothes. Another nudge pulled me from my thoughts. "Chicken," my companion said again, pointing to someone new. This process continued for a while, and I eventually discovered a pattern. People who were well-kept, apparently polite, and keeping to themselves were chickens. It was a strange sort of compliment, but certainly not the worst that I'd heard, especially considering that I'd personally been referred to as a bird. The train soon came to a halt at another stop, and passengers went through the dance of switching places with new arrivals, entering and exiting as their commutes dictated. It was then that a young man in worn-out clothes came storming into view, muttering to himself about something that was clearly aggravating him. Then as the car's doors started to close, this fellow appeared to be suddenly struck by an unpleasant realization. "Crap!" the guy shouted. He flailed with his arms, blocking the doors and causing an alarm to sound in the process. They made a big show of prying them apart. "Darn! Hey, where the heck are you, witch?" As quickly as he had appeared, the fellow had departed. Everyone in the train looked relieved. The woman next to me leaned in close. "Not chicken." Even though I tried, I couldn't stop myself from laughing out loud. Three teenagers who breakdanced their way across the ceiling? Story 2. One of my majors in college was anthropology. During one course, everyone in the class was put in pairs for a mandatory team project. The guy I was stuck with was an idiot, did no work, and then claimed a bunch of the research I had done was his. Since we got a good grade regardless, and since I'm completely non-confrontational due to social anxiety, I didn't do anything about it. Well, the next semester, I'm sitting in the main university building, all the conference areas, bookstore, food courts, etc., eating lunch and reading, and this jerk sits himself down at my table. Apparently, he's taking another anthropology course and wants me to do his darn work again, and he starts demanding information about early human history. So I just start making up the wildest nonsense I can possibly come up with. I recall that I included something about humans first arriving in the Americas hundreds of thousands of years ago, and enormous paddle boats made of sticks and reeds and powered by servants who had to pedal constantly for weeks, as well as the long and painful history of the Neanderthal Wars. Meanwhile, the moron is eating this all up and scribbling notes the whole time. After about 10 minutes of this, he says he has enough and that he has to go type all this up since the assignment is due in a few hours. No thank you or anything. He just takes off. I watch him walk away, sort of smile and say aloud to myself, "You can have all the credit for that one, you jerk." At that point, I hear someone clapping from the table next to mine. I look over to see two professors sitting there eating their lunch. One is grinning and clapping, and the other is laughing so hard he's not even making noise. Just bright red in the face, wheezing while tears running down his face. Story 3. I was on a cruise with my family and extended family a few years ago. During the obligatory safety briefing, we were all crammed into the dining area with life vests on and shown the safety video. In the video, a man falls overboard, and a second man yells, "Man overboard!" and goes to look where the man had fallen right before the stereotypical freeze and what to do in this situation text show up. Before the text shows up, my cousin dubs the man looking overboard by saying, "I've done all I can. He's in God's hands now." Our entire table and surrounding tables burst into laughter. It was probably one of those had-to-be-there situations, but it was one of the funniest moments I remember to this day, probably because of the overwhelming laughter of all these people around us. Another one was when I was on the subway heading home and two women sat next to me. One of them had just gotten a job as a receptionist at a plastic surgery clinic. I was telling her friend all about her new job. She seemed very dumb and naive. Not a very good combo, but she was very pretty. She said she had many questions about plastic surgeries, especially about injections. Then I asked the patient, how does it feel to get one? I think the weirdest part about it would be sitting down because you're not sitting on your bum anymore. Yeah, you are. Is it like sitting on a very comfortable pillow all the time? I couldn't handle it. I don't think I ever laughed that hard in my life. At least her friend was laughing as well, so I didn't feel too horrible. I got off and switched wagons because I could not stop laughing. Story 4. When I was in college, I lived with 3 roommates for 1 year. One of my roommates was out, but one of her friends showed up at our door with a guy. She was looking to borrow my roommate's dress. My roommate just told her to come by and we'd let her in. So she goes into my roommate's room while the guy waits outside the room for her. My other roommates, a few friends, and I were all hanging out in the living room. One of my roommates was looking at classes and said, "There's a class here called Bible as Literature." I said, "I'm going to start a class called Bible as Fiction." The guy heard me and had a laughing fit. For the record, it was just a joke. Another one was when a couple of friends and I were at our university swimming pool. We signed out towels before going. You have to scan your ID card before they give you one. After we finished, showered, and got dressed, we left the locker room and went to the desk to return the towels. Our friend went first. He dropped his towel in the box and started walking away. I stopped him and said, aren't you going to sign out? He said, "What, you mean we have to scan our ID cards again?" I said, "Of course we do. You think they have little implanted chips in the towel that they can use to detect who signed it out?" The guys working behind the desk just started laughing. It wasn't a burst-out laugh, but still, laughing. Story 5. Riding the public bus in Vegas about 13 years ago. I sat kind of in the middle. There was this guy sitting in the front having an extremely animated conversation with another guy next to him. The other guy looked like he was barely acknowledging what the animated guy was saying. We got to a stop and the animated talker guy got up, but the other guy didn't. It was then that I realized they weren't together and that this dude was just talking in a semi-crazy way to some random dude in the bus. But the animated talker didn't want to get off. He wanted the other guy to acknowledge that he was right about something. The other guy was just nodding and trying to get on with his life, but this lunatic just kept yammering away. There was some audible grumbling from the other riders because this dude was now holding up the bus. He finally went to get off. The dude made it almost to the sidewalk when he did an about-face, got back in the bus and yelled out, "And another thing!" At that moment, nearly everyone in the bus yelled at the guy to get out. He obviously wasn't expecting it, as he kind of recoiled and scattered away. The guy did this awkward half-run thing directly into a psychiatrist's office. It was at this moment that an older, gruff guy who had been sitting in the back and quietly reading a newspaper the entire time piped up and said, in a thick East Coast-sounding accent, "Going to see the psychiatrist. Go figure." Everyone in the bus, including myself, just busted out laughing. The story wrote itself. Story 6. The college I attended frequently had local elementary and middle school kids on tours, especially on Fridays. One particular Friday, I was in line for the cafeteria when a group of kids came walking by with a tour guide. One kind of chubby little dude looked a bit uncomfortable. This part of the tour is usually when they have a bathroom break, and clearly, the buddy needed to go. At this point, I should note that the bathrooms are visible from where we're standing, but the tour guide, a fellow student of mine, didn't seem to notice. She just kept going on and on, talking about the history of the building. We watched this kid go from nervous to deeply anxious to visibly clenching over a span of about 3 minutes. This tour guide took a break in her spiel. I figured she was done. The next ones out of her mouth would be ones to free this boy from the purgatory that is having to use the bathroom on a school trip. It'll be over. He would be free. What followed instead was this. So in 1995, a professor named ABC Kalamazoo, "Move, lady, I'm gonna wet my pants." He ran past her to the bathroom. Poor guy. He had the entire line in tears with laughter, though. Story 7. I met this girl in my old English class who had a super jealous partner who didn't want her to be my friend. I still have a wonderful girlfriend, so I'm not in it for anything other than friendship. No, my girlfriend and I are very trusting of each other, for good reasons, not naivete. I went to study Old English with a friend, intending to meet up with my girlfriend who was already there at the library, because I thought they would get along well. And regardless, I always like for her to meet my friends. When we arrived at the second floor of our library, the two of them made introductions and chit-chatted for a smidge. The section of the library permits discussion. Don't worry, we aren't jerks. After we finished our assignment, we stood up from the table, packed up, and prepared to leave. A lovely lady, who's a cute little blonde, said, "It was nice meeting you," and gave my friend a hug. She then stepped back, summoned all the sass of the sassiest of the sisters, and said, "Wait, redo." She brought up the single pointer finger like an exclamation point and said, "You stay away from my person." Everyone in the immediate vicinity chuckled and chortled and generally tried to contain themselves, but this one guy sitting at a computer just lost his mind over it. I busted up laughing. Great times. One of the many reasons I love my woman. So, am I the only one who's slow to eavesdrop in public? I'm missing the fun outside. Anyway, before we jump back into more comedy, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss out on more funny stories coming next. Story 8. I was going to the zoo and there was a man with 2 little girls who I'm presuming were his daughters. One daughter was passed out in a stroller, but the other was on his shoulders. She was in that, "what's this?" phase of toddlerhood and was asking all sorts of zoo questions. She asked, Why are all animals in cages? And with a completely deadpan face, but with the soft lilt of a parent answering a toddler's question, he replied, so they don't eat us all. We're very tasty. Another time when I was at Disneyland, I got in the cart of a roller coaster behind a boy about 9 to 10 years old. It was a smaller roller coaster, wooden with old signs that said to keep your arms in the cart and stuff. He was very nervous about being on a roller coaster, and he was there with his older mother or younger grandmother. The whole time that we were on the roller coaster, he was loudly asking about how safe the ride was and asking if the machine had been tested. At the top of the ride, the adult put her hands in the air and he turned to her with his eyes extremely wide and said, "It's not safe to put your arms out of the cart. You have to put your arms back in the cart, please." Story 9. Working in the emergency room, I was doing paperwork on another patient during a particularly chaotic night. There were multiple patients who were chemically and physically restrained. 2 patients were separated by curtains so they couldn't see each other. Both had clearly indulged in one too many drinks. Situated diagonally across from each other, Dude 1 was incessantly calling out, yelling various things. Hey nurse, accompanied by a flurry of incoherent babbling. Anyone familiar with working in the ER or dealing with such patients would recognize this scenario. Dude number 2 had also been yelling and swearing, but then he started responding to dude number 1. Hey dude, shut up. Eventually, dude 1 caught on that someone was answering him. Hey man, hey, what's going on? Hey. Dude 2 tuned in and retorted, What do you want? D1, I'm stuck in here. D2, hey man. The humorous twist came in after about 30 minutes of continuous banter, swearing, and yelling. There was suddenly silence for about 20 seconds. D2, hey man, are you tied up? D1, yeah man. D2, with a gleeful tone sounded like he was 10 years old. Me too. That was the breaking point for me, and all the staff who were listening in couldn't help but burst into laughter. Story 10. I'm in Chicago, 14 years old, and some older high school kid comes up to me all menacing-like. He asks, do you know what today is? Again in that half-threatening cadence. I quickly answered that I didn't. It was a regular school day, to which he proudly responded, It's Freshman Tuesday, where we rough up freshmen. After processing his response for a few seconds, it didn't make sense. But it's Wednesday, I responded. It was. His face was priceless. Also in Chicago, but significantly younger, I was rollerblading around with my buddy when some kids wielding makeshift weapons surrounded us. Looking back, they were probably around 12 years old, a few years older than our elders. Anyway, after encircling, they finally asked, Are you guys affiliated with that group? I had no idea what they were referring to. The group with all the Ks, he clarified. Ooh, no, I responded. I'm part of the Fallen Dragoons clan, which was my Age of Empires 2 clan at the time. I guess my answer sufficed, since they promptly rode away thereafter. Story 11. I went shopping with my housemate and she picked up a huge jar of Nutella with that sort of guilty hesitation girls do. We stood in the middle of the aisle. Ooh, should I? Dare I? She agonized, playing with the weight of the jar in her hand and a grim, tortured crease in her brow. With an equally intense look of deep thought, I caressed my beard ponderously. He'll be wanting a spoon with that. Suddenly we heard the sound of someone choking behind us. Looking around, we saw this woman staring at us, red-faced, tears welling up and clasping one hand over her mouth. There was a brief pause and then she completely lost her mind, dropped her basket and ran out of the shop, bursting with laughter. As far as we were aware, we were being completely serious, so we didn't really know what to make of it. And we felt bad for making the shop lose a customer, so we bought 2 jars of Nutella to make up for it. It was a good day. Also, when I used to live in NorCal, I had dreads and a beard. One hot summer day, I went floating down the Sac River with some friends. It was a long float, and I got separated from the group when I went for a dip. I took a mason jar from my backpack, where I always put my keys and smokes, and lit one up. There was a group of sorority girls a bit away from me, and since sound travels further in water, I could pretty much hear everything they were saying. I could hear them talking about me, and one of them said to one another, Maybe the nice Rasta man will share some grass with us. I burst out laughing, and she instantly turned red. It was funnier to me because even though I looked the part, I never smoked that stuff. From that day on, I was always the nice Rasta man when we went floating. Story 12. Once, my husband and I were reciting quotes from that SNL skit with Paula Deen while we were in a kitchen outlet store at the mall. My husband said, Upon seeing Paula Deen's kitchenware, my booter-covered finger yipped. My booter-covered finger slipped. The cashier was floored. A little backstory. 3 or 4 years ago, I accidentally injured my left index finger while cooking at home. So at work today, I joked about wanting to knock somebody out. My coworker responded, You're gonna knock them out with your injured hand? Nah, dude, I'm not a southpaw. Otherwise, you'd be calling me Rocky. But you're too short to be Rocky. And without missing a beat, it came out with, Then call me Pebbles. I'm actually still really proud of the swift delivery there. Anyway, there were 2 customers in line while this occurred, and one of them did this chortle snort, which was great. I'm clever. Another instance was when we were riding the city bus one evening, and the bus was packed. All of a sudden, from the back of the bus, some chick said loudly, Don't look at me. You don't need to look over here. So of course I turned around and tried to see who said it. The bus was too packed, I couldn't tell, but for 30 minutes, every couple of minutes you'd hear that chick yell, "Don't freaking look at me! Look at the ground!" Or, "Screw you, don't stare at me!" Then to top it off, my husband started imitating her. "Don't look over here! Don't freaking stare at me!" I was practically rolling. The whole thing was that funny. Story 13. I was in a school play and I played one of the supporting characters. I had no theater experience, but when the play began, I felt confident. I completely shucked it, even after 20 plus hours of rehearsals and choreography, but I kind of just shrugged it off. Going to my car, I heard a group of parents talking to their kids in the play. They asked who the character I played was. The kid said that he really didn't know me that much. The parents proceeded to comment on my performance, saying it looked like, and quote, "a struggling penguin trying to fly." A figure of speech meaning I did not belong there. I completely lost it and almost fell while laughing. I guess they heard me because they all looked at me and the kid said that I was him. They said they didn't mean to call me struggling and left. I tried to say it was okay, but I'm still dizzy from all the giggling. First and last time ever doing theater. They didn't exactly say it to me, but I think it is relatable. Well, that dude can take a joke. Story 14. While giving evidence in court against a lady who was part of a theft group, I stated I was sure the defendant had ID'd me while covertly following her. The judge inquired as to how I knew she was aware of me, and I replied, "Because when she turned to look my way, I exposed myself to her." The defense face-palmed, the prosecution stared blankly, the judge just leaned towards me, peering over his reading glasses, and I just stood there with a matter-of-fact look. Then it hit me. I waited till the case was finished, and every single person who exited that courtroom came out and laughed their bum off. The judge and I became good acquaintances, and I became a hit at work. Some of those overheard moments had me cracking up, I gotta admit. On that note, if you're up for more gut-busting stories like these, make sure to watch What Made You Laugh the Hardest in Your Entire Life next. Story 1 is a riot. See you there.